I what if, yes I do. I what if, and you can too. Hey guys, MasakoX here. As you can probably tell on this channel, for the last year and a half, what ifs have sort of become part of its DNA, you know? All of this though could not have happened without the inspiration and dedication that came from Quaman and Geekdom 101 with their own what ifs. And they are really good. I suggest that you go and subscribe to their channels and check out their what ifs because they are something to behold. In my mind, what ifs are the best way to actually show an appreciation for a certain show. It shows that you have some kind of idea and forethought and insight to the world that is populated by these characters, and you got your own little spin on it. To explore the wonders that could have been if Toriyama just woke up one day and said, I'm gonna do that instead. What ifs are all about interpretation and how one person can view the world of Dragon Ball, or any anime, or any medium for that matter. So today I thought I'd shed a little insight on how I go about making what ifs, as well as my own thought process on the medium and genre as a whole. You can therefore try to understand whenever I'm doing a what if, where I'm trying to go with it, and you can just think of my thought process and concepts going into each and every one of them. Now, one thing I must stress out from the very beginning, that just because we come up with what ifs, it's not saying that we think the overall plot of the original story is terrible at all. Far from it. If the plot of Dragon Ball was terrible, then how come it's one of the most popular franchises in the entire world? I think Toriyama did something right there, which he and many other companies have managed to profit from years and years and years, and they will continue to profit from for years and years and years. I'm not saying it's bad in the slightest, it's got some quirks, but I grew up with this stuff and I loved it. That being said, I do think of moments that could have been. Moments which could have made Dragon Ball an entirely different animal. Sometimes in small ways, sometimes it could have been majorly different. One thing's for sure, all of this thinking kind of makes you analyze Dragon Ball in a different light, something that you didn't think about before. Why Toriyama and his editors thought the way they thought. Sometimes for the best, sometimes for the worst, like why did they take the easy way out when they could have just done X or Y or Z? Z. Yeah, I get it, it's a kids show so it shouldn't really have any nuances, what's there to expect, but that's a really flawed argument. That shouldn't excuse for lazy storytelling and thinking that all kids are dumb and they should only be given really simple and infantile stories. That's not right. You should provide them engaging, relatable narratives that will stick with them throughout their entire lives, something they can look back on and think, yeah, that's still pretty great. Kids are people too, not mindless drones. Yeah, sorry for getting a little bit heavy there, it just means a lot to me. Any kid of mine is going to get the best story times, I swear to Kami. Okay, what ifs. I remember when I started to make these what ifs that I would stick to a far less rigid model than some other what ifs are. They tend to kind of try and think of a more logical way of things, whereas I try and go for more of an entertainment purpose or value, you know? I take a leaf out of Toriyama's book. After all, it is his story, and if I took a very logical and smart and nihilistic approach towards things, it wouldn't feel like a Toriyama plot at all. It's supposed to be entertainment, not a realistic plot, because Dragon Ball is far from realistic. That's why people watch stuff on television and online, to escape reality. One thing's for sure, we cannot turn Dragon Ball into a buzzkill. So in that case, I pull many Toriyamas, and what do I mean by that? Well, I take routes which are somewhat convenient, so long as they have a satisfying payoff later on. Granted, I don't always get it right, but I try my best. Nobody's perfect. Except a perfect cell, of course. So let's think of a typical what if plot I do and just go through the process. See if you can take some ideas from it and come up with your own style of what ifs based on what Toriyama has provided. For example, when I took on the Raditz what if, I took up a monumental challenge. You see, the earlier you start the what if in terms of the overall plot, like in Dragon Ball, the bigger the scope you could have, which in a way makes it much more difficult. The what ifs that start later on, say for example the what if Vegeta stay fused one, have far less scope and are a little bit more rigid and restrictive. It's pretty easy to work on because all you have to change are the things that go on in Super, and before Super came along, it was just boo, and then that's it. The Gine and Bardock what ifs are probably the biggest challenges ever because they start at the beginning of everything in Dragon Ball. Everything changes. Gine's arrival at the beginning of Dragon Ball meant that Grandpa Gohan survives, Goku doesn't become Goku and stays Kakarot. And basically the fate of the Earth was guaranteed for the most part in Dragon Ball because Gine was actually uber strong for Earth. But let's get back to the Raditz what if for a second. When starting to write a what if story, I come up with one chapter at a time. This is to make sure that the plot is fresh in my head, I don't end up second guessing myself later on or restricting my scope because I might want to come up with something fresh later on, and if I realize, oh, I already wrote something for that, well, I might have come up with something even better. You may think that's really short-minded of me to do so, but that's what Toriyama did with his manga. He wrote them chapter by chapter to try and keep things fresh and kind of give himself some suspense, thinking, oh, I wonder how it's going to turn out next time. Because otherwise, if he knew, then it wouldn't really be much fun. That, or he couldn't be bothered to come up with anything ahead of time. I think it's a little of both. Let the future Toriyama deal with that nonsense. The same applies to my what ifs. I don't get wound up in the bigger picture too much. I mean, of course, I have some basic ideas just to kind of give some groundwork and all, but it's very, very open and flexible. It can change, but I know where some things are gonna go. But for the most part, if they change, I don't get hung up on it. When it comes to scripts in the here and now, I try and keep it to make sure that the videos last between 13 and 15 minutes. I think that's a good length for each particular bite-sized chapter. If it were any longer, it would just feel a little odd and a little bit too drawn out, especially when sometimes people are waiting for several weeks, or in some case almost a year. Sorry about that. Usually when it comes to the length of a script, about 1800 to 2000 words suffices for a decent sized script. Now in terms of keeping tabs with the original story to make sure I hit the same beats, or essentially the same beats, I have a copy of the synopsis of Dragonball to hand at all times. It's just to make sure that I'm not missing any important moments or seeing what I'm actually omitting because some things have changed. Maybe try and keep some kind of guideline. For example, in part 1 of What If Raditz Turned Good, when Raditz escaped the wrath of Piccolo, Nappa and Vegeta still came to Earth, but for slightly different motives, in the sense that they still wanted to test out Piccolo's might and how strong these Earthlings were, but also to see whether they could actually find the perfect excuse to take out Raditz because he had disappointed them for the last time. If he didn't get in the way, then good, they can label him a coward. If he does get in the way, then good, they can kill him with justification. That added tension ensured that Raditz would indeed join the Z Fighters, albeit through less auspicious ways. Raditz was a very cautious individual before the events of R&R, the spin-off series, took hold. The original Raditz was very sneaky, he would do anything to try and keep himself alive. He was a very cautious soul, which resulted in him being quite a weak Saiyan, but he was still powerful enough to be intimidating towards many different types of races, because he could just hang out with Vegeta and Nappa, and therefore that would imply that he's strong. Nay, the fact that he's part of the Frieza forces, even though some of the Frieza forces are stronger than him, but it doesn't matter! Impressions speak volumes. He used that knowledge to great effect, and now he no longer had that luxury. Raditz had to adapt quickly. He had to get real, and from there, he became quite the different character. It resulted in a character who was still cautious, but in a more useful way, being the perfect foil to Goku, because many times throughout the story, Raditz would pick up the slack that Goku lacked. Raditz also saved the Earth being blown up in the Buu saga because Kid Buu never showed up because Vegeta didn't do the whole thing of holding Good Buu to hostage. That whole thing didn't happen, so Raditz took out Super Buu lickety-split. That cautious nature became, instead of one of Raditz's weaknesses, one of his greatest strengths. Yes, I know, there are some times in my stories where things don't make sense or it seems a little too convenient for many people's liking. Again, that's a Toriyama trait. Toriyama is a man who will create plot devices and objects that will convenience everybody around, especially the characters. You know the Hoi Poi capsules that are pretty much the intrinsic part of Dragon Ball and make everything convenient in the Dragon world? That was a tool of convenience. It meant that you didn't have to worry about any kind of MacGuffins, and you could carry anything you want. We need some kind of habitat. Capsule? Boom, done. The whole Super Saiyan thing? That was just a time convenience. It showed that somebody could gotten stronger really quickly, and also it meant they didn't have to ink so much. All about convenience and time saving. If there was anything that could make the job easier or make sure that nobody questions him about it, Toriyama would do it. I'm not using this as an excuse, but if I want to try and make sure that the stories that I provide are somewhat authentic to the original Toriyama source material, I've got to take some leaves out of his book, as I said earlier. Okay, regarding couples and such. Sometimes in these stories, things happen which result in certain characters getting together when they didn't usually get together in the original story. And especially in places where it doesn't seem very apparent. Like with Yamcha and Chi-Chi, for example, in the What If Goku Married Bulma story. Despite being a very popular point of debate, people are somewhat close-minded about the idea of Goku getting together with Bulma, but there is a little bit of evidence in Dragon Ball stating that it could have easily happened if Toriyama woke up at the different side of a bed one day. There are elements in the fourth ending of Dragon Ball which show that Goku and Bulma are somewhat together, or Bulma has some kind of feelings, because Chi-Chi doesn't feature in it except for one shot. Bulma did think that Goku was pretty cute and did have a crush on him, but those feelings were quashed when she found out that Chi-Chi was gunning for Goku, and she did the very mature thing and backed down. In my story, I have her go, screw that, I have feelings for Goku and I'm gonna tell him. And it also helped Bulma's case that Goku wasn't interested in Chi-Chi at all, but it didn't mean that Chi-Chi was left out in the dark or in the cold. There was a little plot point in the original story that Yamcha did ask about going out with Chi-Chi, and she declined politely because she already had her eyes on Goku. But if Goku wasn't around, then things could have happened, and in my story, they did. Well, there you go, Yamcha, I'm throwing a bone out for you. What I'm saying is that it's pretty cool to think of different relationships that could have easily have happened if a certain plot point changed. In Dragon Ball, there are plenty of loose ends to explore, so if you are struggling to think of an idea for a what if, just think of a loose end that has really gotten on your nerves and try and fix it. Touch upon them, follow them up, analyze them. Would it make a difference? Would it be interesting to follow? You could go light-hearted, you could go dark, you could stick to the original formula, or you could do what I do and follow Toriyama's example. Okay, I'll give you an example, something you can work on in your own time. At the end of the Namek saga, when Goku has given Frieza some ki, and he doesn't take up that offer and just uses that energy to try and kill Goku. What if Frieza took up Goku's offer in that he then escaped planet Namek, didn't try and kill Goku, and therefore kind of just slunk away into the ether and survived and didn't end up being torn to pieces when the planet blew up? What kind of direction would you have? Would Frieza just try and exact revenge at a later date? Would he try to reinvent himself? Would he work with King Cold? Or maybe King Cold would become the bad guy? We don't know. That's all up for debate. Get on it. He could disband his armies, he could live in a permanent state of fear. A hermit, somehow terrified by the thought of Saiyans and Super Saiyans, the race he tried to subjugate. He's now terrified of them. You even might want to try and make him a good guy? Okay, that's a little bit far for me, but if you want to give it a go, hey, I'm not going to stop you. It's fun to think about these things and how you might get to these eventualities. No what if is perfect, of course, and I do hold my hand out that sometimes I do get it wrong in my what ifs. I sometimes forget things, or I don't touch upon things, or I straight up forget things. If I do find out about it, I do try and fix them in the next installment. When I got some blowback for Ranch being in the Tournament of Power in Raditz Part 11, I tried to walk that back a little bit and explain that, well, she's not replacing Frieza, she's replacing Ten Shinhan for a start. And I also made sure that she didn't end up being a Mary Sue, because a lot of people were very concerned about that. Instead of her then beating Caulifla hands down and going towards the end alongside Gohan, her senpai, I made her come to terms with her Saiyan side, because she hadn't really been challenged by that before, or at least not in so far in my thinking at the time. It's kind of like the same thing that Gohan did when he went Super Saiyan 2 in the Cell Saga, coming to terms with the Saiyan side, the genetic side. In the midst of a battle, her Saiyan rage and Saiyan pride was starting to get in the way, and therefore she slipped up, made mistakes, and therefore she was the first one to be eliminated. It made sure that any characters that were generated from these what ifs didn't get too high on their horses, if you know what I mean. Ranch was still young at the time, and she still needed to learn things. The boy still needed to learn things, and so she had to as well. She just had to learn it in a more humbling way. If a certain what if that you come up with generates new characters, don't give them too many handouts that seems disingenuous with the entire story. You gotta remember that for the most part, Goku is still the head of the show. Any character you have has got to have a very sensible and sensical means of having a relationship with them in some way. Or they've got to feel like they are part of the story. If they don't, then why are you trying? Keep it rooted within the principles of Dragon Ball. So there we go. I hope this has gone some way in shedding some light into the way I describe what ifs and how you'll be able to as well. Or at least it gives you an idea about where to begin. Why don't you go back to some of my older what ifs and just see where my thought processes are? You might be able to see some of the key points. So what do you guys think? Are you coming up with your own what ifs in the future? What do you think of the general workflow that I have? Leave a comment below and let's get this discussion going. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Until the next one, be sure to like and subscribe. Catch you later!